Hello everyone. So today we're going to be looking at some of the basic equipment and the uniform that U.S. soldiers wore and carried in World War I. And one of the first things to remember is that in April of 1917, when the U.S. actually gets into the war, we had not been mobilizing like so many other nations across the world. So with a sudden influx of an army that's going to eventually be around 4 million people, that's a lot of stuff that we needed that we just did not have and didn't have that much time to get it. So a lot of what we actually have will be British designed or British in origin in some way. So beginning down at the bottom. So almost every nation in the world use some type of leg covering. Now many of them start to use something called puttees or leg wrappings, and this was a British design that they had picked up from Indian soldiers. And so American soldiers began to do the same thing. Now the puttees, or Puttees, this is basically a 9-foot long length of wool cloth that you wrap around starting at the top of your boots, up over the ankle, and all the way up the calf. Now the goal of this was to primarily try and keep dirt and mud from getting the tops of your boots, but it also helps to keep your legs warm, so it's wool on top of wool. And so these would wrap over top of the M1917 trench boot. Moving up, you have the M1917 uniform. Now the uniform itself looks kind of like a dress uniform, and that was really kind of by design. It's not until well after World War I, before World War II, that the US military begins to have kind of a differentiated dress uniform versus your field uniform. So what American soldiers were wearing on parade was pretty much the same thing they wore in the field. That's why it has this kind of look that it does. Now moving up, we have the helmet. So when American soldiers first went to war, they wore what was called the campaign hat. And this style of hat is something that you still see today in a lot of law enforcement and like park rangers and things like that. And this hat served fairly well in the field, but once they got to France, they began to be issued helmets. Well, there was no place to actually put that particular thing. So your campaign hat was really kind of unwieldy. You couldn't fit it in your pack. You couldn't really store it anywhere. It was going to get all crumpled up. So what many Americans began to use was adopt something that the French had, and it was a style of cap that they began to call the overseas cap. And this is one of the things that became kind of a staple to show that you had actually been overseas, because no one back in the States was issued that particular style of hat. So if you came back home in your uniform and you had an overseas cap on, that was kind of a symbol that you had been to France. Now the helmet itself, the M1917, again, this was almost an exact clone of what the British Army was using. Really the only difference was a little bit of changes in some of the leather and metal and the riveting. But other than that, it looks exactly the same as what the British had. Now the helmet itself affords some protection. By no means is this thing bulletproof. It's not even bullet resistant. A bullet would go straight through this thing. But it is designed to try and protect your head from things like shrapnel, so slower moving projectiles, something that might hit you in the head and knock you unconscious or kill you. It can provide some protection from that. So now let's look at some of the basic equipment that American soldiers carried. So what I'm basically wearing and carrying right now is a pretty standard look of what many American soldiers would have been carrying by the end of 1917 into 1918. So we can start with the belt. So this is the dismounted cartridge belt, and this belt has 5 pouches on each side, and inside of each one of these you would be able to carry 2 5-round stripper clips for your rifle, which is either the Springfield M1903 or the Enfield Model 1917, both chambered in .30-06. So a stripper clip is basically 5 individual bullets on a little thin piece of metal that holds them all together that you can load into the top of your rifle. So each one of these can hold 2 of those all the way around, plus 1 in your rifle. Now on the belt itself, you have these holes at the bottom, and this can hold lots of different items that are issued. One of the things almost every soldier is going to carry is a Carlisle bandage pouch. Now, a discerning eye will notice that this is slightly larger than the original Carlisle bandage pouch. This one is technically called a diagnostic pouch, but it's the same exact design, just slightly larger. But inside of this thing is going to be a Carlisle bandage, and inside this little metal tin that would open up like a sardine can, it's going to have a single bandage in it. You're also going to carry on your belt a canteen. Now, inside of your canteen cover is your canteen. Now, this is a pretty simple design, and this is the one that's going to be used all the way through World War II into Korea, and it's not until about the 1960s that this transitions into being plastic. Now, underneath your canteen, you're typically going to have a canteen cup. So this is the M1910 canteen cup. So it fits underneath the canteen inside of your pouch, and the reason I already have it out is it's really hard to get out of one. And the handle simply folds down underneath it. But the way this is designed, so you can now hold this, you can, set it up next to a fire, you can heat up some water to make some coffee or make even some soup. You can do a lot with this. So the equipment that you see on my back is the M1910 Haversack. So let's take a look at that. So this is the M1910 Haversack, and this is by far one of the worst pieces of equipment ever issued to the American military for a couple of reasons. One, its shape is kind of tube-like, so it doesn't really fit very well in the body. It doesn't distribute weight that well. There's not a lot of room in this, and most especially the way that it actually has to open is really awkward and not functional very well, which we'll look at in the next video. But some of the things you can see on the side of this is, first, I have my bayonet for my rifle. You also see up top here this pouch. This is called the meat can pouch, and this is going to hold what in modern day parlance we'd call your mess kit. But your meat can is primarily like your skillet dinner plate kind of thing, as well as your eating utensils. Underneath this, you can see there is a T-handled shovel. Now, the shovel is technically reproduction, but this is how most trenches are going to be dug or repaired, is by hand, by individual people with little tiny shovels or pickaxes. So if you didn't get issued a shovel, which most men were, you get a pickaxe. And so this pickaxe is the M1910, and it would attach the same place that your shovel would. And it's simply the wood handle and the pickaxe head that just fit together to make a little miniature pickaxe. Below this, you have the pack tail that is attached to the back of the pack itself, and this is what's going to hold your blanket. So this is a wool blanket that's rolled up, and so with this full kit on, this is also integrated into the cartridge belt itself, which is another problem. So what many soldiers definitely did was to take the pack and attach the straps to itself, but it's not really designed to do that. So it's designed to be integrated into your belt itself. Well, the problem with that is that if you were, walking with this whole bulky thing and suddenly you get into action, you need to drop the pack and be more maneuverable, you can't really do that. You're just stuck wearing this whole thing because you'd have to take it all off, lay it down, and unhook a whole bunch of clips to be able to get this thing off of it. This is also, unfortunately, the exact same design of pack that we used all the way through World War II. It's not until really the very end of the war that we start developing a better type of pack system. So the vast majority of American soldiers go into World War II wearing this same piece of garbage equipment. One of the most iconic images of World War I is a gas mask. Gas is something that we almost completely associate with World War I as much as trenches. Now, a gas mask and bag is something that every American soldier is going to have on their person, even if they're well behind the front lines. This is something you can see in all kinds of images and footage of the war, that even men who have no other equipment on, no ammunition, no canteens, no nothing, will still have a gas mask bag on. Now, if you were away from the lines, you could have your bag at a lower slung position, so across your hip. But if you were toward the front lines, you're required to have it in the ready position. And like so many other things, when America got into the war, we're going to be using a British design. So we're primarily in the first year or so of the war using the British small box respirator. And it will be in a bag something like this. This is the American-made version of the corrected English model, something we have later in the war. And the opening itself always faces your chest, because the front of this, you see it has this cord, and it also has a hook here. And so the way this is designed is that the cord would wrap around your body and it would clip to the back of this so that it was completely strapped to your chest. Because what you didn't want is kind of how I have it here so that I can show it, is that when you lean forward, it doesn't hang loose. You want it attached to your body. And it also, you want the opening toward your chest so that if you're laying down, you're not crawling and getting dirt inside of it whenever you're actually moving. So you can open this up, and inside is going to be something like this. Now, this is a replica that I made a few years ago as a way to kind of show classes how this would look. But this gas mask, the way that it would function is it has a snorkel mouthpiece and it has a nose clip. So underneath that little number right there would be a nose clip. So a good way to kind of have an idea of how this would feel. If you've ever had a snorkel before, that's going to seem familiar. But something you can even try and do right now, just while you're watching this, is pinch your nose so that you're only breathing through your mouth, and breathe for a little while and then try to swallow. It is very uncomfortable. And so if you had to wear this thing, you're going to be uncomfortable, not able to drink anything, not able to eat anything. You can't take it off for potentially several hours. And so that's really hard to deal with. Now, attached to the mask itself is the hose and your filter. And so the filter itself has an opening in the bottom. This is where air intake is going to come in. And inside of this pack, so what you see right here, the stitching right here, this is where your filter would sit, and it would have this little metal coiled spring to allow air to get into this. So you're breathing clean air through the filter, through the hose, into your mask. Now, attached to the filter, you see this little cardboard piece of paper. So this is what you're going to fill out if you're exposed to gas, because if you get hit with gas, it's not just the mask and the filter that's going to have to be treated. It's everything, including you, your body. So your whole uniform, your gas mask bag, your canteen cover, everything about you is going to have to be taken off and treated and cleaned. And so having an accurate record of what type of gas was it, how long was the exposure, that definitely determines how much cleaning has to be done to try and treat it. Now, once we got into the war, and this is something that exists well before the U.S. actually goes, whenever gas masks first began to be a thing and gas is a real threat, they had to try and come up with ways of how do we alert people that gas is nearby. Now, initially, it might be things like just shouting or whistles or some kind of loud noise that was indicative that gas is nearby. But most of the things like that involve you having to use your mouth and your lungs to say it. Well, if you're the first person who sees gas on the horizon, you need to put your mask on first. So many times they use something like this. It's just a little simple gas rattle. This is one that I made a few years ago out of just some basic homemade wood supplies. But when you sling it, it makes a very loud and distinctive noise. Nothing else sounds like that. So if you heard that sound, you immediately are going to have to get your gas mask on. Now, that's also one of the reasons that American soldiers, the way they wear their helmet is kind of different. So there is a chin strap for the helmet, and the regulation said that you needed to have it at the base of your chin. So you don't hook it all the way underneath the bottom of your chin, because you have to get that off to get your gas mask on. So they wanted it easy, so if you have it at the base of your chin, you can very quickly get your helmet off. But what most soldiers ended up doing is just strapping it to the back of their head, and that way you can easily just flip the helmet off really quick, and then you don't have to fumble with the chin strap. So your gas mask is a piece of equipment that you are absolutely going to have on your person at all times, because even though gas is not actually that deadly by comparison to artillery or rifle fire, the fear of it is so palpable that this is something you always want to have just in case. Another piece of equipment you'd see used throughout the war is a periscope. Now, this is a pretty simple box periscope, and the way this works is it is a hollow tube like this with a 45-degree mirror here, a 45-degree mirror at the top, so that you could raise this up over top of an obstacle to be able to see what's on the other side without exposing your head and face.